Welcome, everybody. So just as Noah mentioned, we want to go around and have everybody mention where they're from, what organization they work with, and if you attended the Farmland Access Summit or the Emerging Farmers Conference, a reflection from one of those two, or also share about a project that you're working on that's relevant to the theme of equitable land tenure. So I will go ahead and start. I'm Gary Hampton, and I work with a number of different organizations. I'm working on the SARE grant here. This webinar with Agrarian Trust and through the SARE grant. Then also I work with Commons Land around shared land access and equitable land tenure. And then also I work with Renewing the Countryside around the National Urban Ag Initiative. So some farmers that are going to be looking for land access. So common question that's really came up throughout the theme of the two conferences from, in my opinion, was around collective and shared land access and then cooperative farming or cooperative land access models. So that seemed to be a common theme. And so I will pass it on to Valentine.
Thanks, Gary. I'm Valentine Cadieux. Most of you now know me, I realize, and it's awesome to see you. I especially reflecting with the communities that we work with in the week since the Farmland Access Summit, and just reflecting kind of in the in-between spaces. Part of what was really striking for me is the way that it feels in a community to have some of the equitable parts of the farmland access and tenure question become more centered. So like right from the start with the opening keynote that Kathy Roof gave and the work that Zach Ducheneau shared that's happening at USDA, the accounting for the idea that like a lot of the farmland we're talking about needs to be reckoned with a history of colonialism and like keeping land back right in the middle of the conversation and asking questions about the assumptions we have about property and that kind of relationship, just making that space normalized. And then from what I've been hearing from folks in the community, hearing Commissioner Bailey talking about this afterwards on the news, like that just, it feels like a conversation that we've been fighting for having arrived. And that I recognize it doesn't mean we've solved all of the problems, but not having to fight for them to be on the agenda, yeah, felt like, I guess, my biggest reflection on like, what does that change? Was that make more possible for us as we try to do this work?
Thanks. Yeah, I'm Kevin Ellis, use he, him pronouns. I work with Hennepin County, Minnesota. Presently, we got kind of put on the back burner. Unfortunately, we had a very busy field season doing soil and water conservation projects, but we've been working on trying to develop some sort of agricultural land protection and access programming at the county. We've been doing some outreach, focus groups, surveys, trying to have one-on-one discussions with farmers and farming groups to kind of figure out what would be best to put into a proposal to hand to our leadership, hopefully next spring, and maybe try and find some way to have this work kind of reflected in our overall department. So I attended the Farmland Summit. I wasn't able to make the Emerging Farmers Conference, unfortunately. But yeah, similarly, I thought it was a great program, and I like that. I mean, kind of ditto to what Valentine said on just kind of centering the conversations around, you know, land back and having that even kind of more in the stuffy governmental world, kind of keeping those things alive as well. So yeah, I drew some inspiration of that as well.
My name is Noah Wirtz. I use they, them pronouns. I'm coming from Agrarian Trust. And projects that I'm working on, this is one of them. Just helping facilitate these meetings. And then I'm also working on setting up a similar series of equitable land access workshops in the Northeast. And then just generally doing communications for Agrarian Trust.
I'm Aleya Fraser. I use she, her pronouns. I work on land protection in the greater Twin Cities Metro with the Minnesota Land Trust. My first meeting, I've been busy this fall, but I'm excited to join the group. And I wasn't able to make either of the conferences, but I'm really eager to hear kind of the takeaways from everyone else. The Land Trust, Minnesota Land Trust, mainly focuses on conservation easements and conservation-focused easements, but we have a little bit of farmland protection work kind of in the early stages happening right now, and I think it's very much recognized as a gap in our work and someplace that, especially the Twin Cities Metro, we'd like to better serve the community. So I'm happy to join today.
Everyone, thanks. My name is Grace. My pronouns are she, her. I work for the City of Minneapolis Health Department on the Homegrown Minneapolis team, which is the city's local food systems initiative. Homegrown is 3 of us plus the Homegrown Minneapolis Food Council, which is the city's advisory board on food policy. And so supporting urban ag has been one of the focuses of Homegrown for a long time. Since the beginning, basically, and is one of my focuses of my work. And land access specifically is a strategy that arose in Minneapolis Food Vision, which is our 10-year strategic kind of visionary document, and is one of the focuses for our 3-year kind of implementation plan that we're just kicking off. So, both folks already growing food in Minneapolis and wanting to be able to stay on their land is a huge problem. And then also trying to help people find new spaces to grow food in Minneapolis. So excited to hear all the great ideas from everyone and get all the different opinions. And yeah, I was able to attend the Emerging Farmers Conference and the first day of the Land Access Summit. So that was really great, and excited to hear kind of all the different perspectives and kind of more long-term approaches that I think sometimes in trying to fix things and really quick, sometimes it's good to hear about the longer term ideas too, and think about how we might be able to make those possible. So.
I'm Stephen Carpenter from Farmers Legal Action Group, he, him pronouns. And I actually, unfortunately, missed both the summit and the conference. So I was just hoping to catch up a little bit as to what's been going on. And I'm also on the board for TCALT. And so I've done TCALT work, and Flag is trying to help TCALT and others figure out some of the legal restrictions to urban farming. So that's kind of what I've been most recently doing here.
My name is Moses Momanyi. I'm a farmer in, I don't know, everywhere, all over Minnesota. But yeah, I have a farm in Cambridge, and I work with other African immigrant farmers here in the Twin Cities. We have different locations that we are trying to access land through. So both, all of them mostly leasing. So we have some farmers at Frogtown, some farmers at Osceola, Philadelphia Community Farm, and other places we are renting. Total of about 40 farmers, new since 2020. So it's a huge task if we think through everything from these farmers just doing this in like a training mode, so that after that, they have to find land to buy, and also they have to find markets, they have to find networks. All those things are real and challenging. So I'm part of this project with the AT, and also part of the Commons Land, Renewing the Countryside, a cohort of land access. And yeah, so I'm all over.
I'm here with two hats on. I'm a land access advocate in my personal life. I don't know if people on this call can identify with your personal life and your professional life kind of mixing. Lots of gray area, but my name is Jen Rip. My pronouns are she and they. I work with a group of community organizers in Decorah on community land access with Hannah Breckbill is kind of heading that up. And then for Savannah Institute, I'm an agroforestry educator, and it was really clear to me from the last couple of meetings in this land summit that like this work is really intrinsically tied to perennial adoption. Land access, long-term land access is long-term stewardship, and that's why we're all here. So.
My name is Shelley Rothman. I am in eastern Wisconsin. I work for Foxhead Regenerative Agriculture Project. We work with the local food and farm network and also for farmland access for regenerative farmers. I work with the Farmland Access Hub here in Wisconsin, and I attended the Farmland Summit, and yeah, farmland access is a challenge for everyone, and making it equitable is even more so. And I am also glad that we are talking about it and working on it. But for me, there still remains a lot of questions. And so it's nice to have all these brains around the fire to tackle that. So thanks everybody for being here.
Hi, I'm Phoebe. I use she, her pronouns. I'm in Minneapolis right now. I am a farmer, I guess, in the Midwest, and also working on a podcast project with Valentine more recently around stories about local food systems. And I was only able to attend the second day of the Farmland Summit, but I think something that's feeling really kind of exciting and present for me is just the last session I went to. There were two people sharing about BT farms in Madison and kind of the agri community that they're kind of trying to build on there. And that was really, really exciting to learn about. So.
Hi, everyone. My name is Maddie. I live here in Red Wing, Minnesota, in Southeast Minnesota, and I work for the Prairie Island Indian community on coordinating food sovereignty projects. Yeah, just jumping in here today. I wasn't able to make it to either of the conferences that we'll be talking about today, so I was hoping to do a little catch up and hear what others have learned and are taking away from them, and just kind of learn what this group has been up to. So excited to be here today.
Like Maddie, the speaker just before me, I did miss the conference, and I missed both conferences. So I'm looking forward to connecting and catching up on the conversations that happened there. I work for a nonprofit called the Conservation Fund, and we run a farmland access and farmland ownership program called the Working Farms Fund. And we've been getting some calls from farmers in the Minneapolis area about bringing the program there. So I'm just trying to learn and listen and meet. And thank you for.
Hi, I'm Lisa Garcia. I'm a backyard gardener actually, and I work for Urban Farm and Garden Alliance. And I'm just here to learn and see what's going on. So thank you for this opportunity.
Hi everyone, my name is Naima Dhore. I am a farmer. I farm with my family in Greater Cambridge. Similar to Moses, I feel like I'm all over the place, but I do have an urban farm in South Minneapolis, part of the Somali community, an immigrant or East African community. So I did attend the Emerging Farmers Conference, and I feel like each year I'm just energized by that conference and the conversation around land access. And, you know, that's something really close to me personally. I've been dealing with, just accessing land for a long time. But happy to share that, you know, for those of you who don't know what I went through. I recently did purchase the land, so just really having these raw conversation real time with, you know, those of us who might not know how to navigate this very complicated system, or oftentimes never really designed for someone like me, how to access land and how to grow food that is close to home. So looking forward to having a conversation with everyone, not just today, but really excited to hear some of the folks that I feel like might be a good partnership with the work that I'm doing in South Minneapolis. So thanks.
Okay, my name's Kaisa Beatty. I work with the Minnesota Farm Service Agency. I'm located in St. Paul. FSA is an agency underneath the USDA. And I got to attend both, luckily. So I really appreciated just being able to learn just different perspectives around land access. And really, there's such a wide breadth of how people want to approach land access. And so it was really helpful for me to hear those. But to be honest, I walked away feeling a little overwhelmed. Everything was, it was great to learn, but there's so much work that I can do within FSA and, you know, FSA as a whole to meet growers and help growers find land that haven't traditionally had relationships with the Farm Service Agency. So overwhelmed, but in a good way.
Well, and thank you all so much for working with us on our hope to be able to like meet in this period where people still are either overwhelmed or curious about what happened, because we thought it would be a good time to process some of it and to pick up some of the threads where people were like, with a little effort, we could make some progress here. There's like some action that's possible from what we learned. So really our goal today is some strategic organizing around, and it doesn't have to be from those meetings necessarily. Those were like a nice opportunity for a lot of the threads to go together. But a lot of you who weren't there also mentioned amazing threads that are going on in your work. So let us give you a little bit of a sense of what we were hoping for the day, and then we can kind of check in about like the mechanics of how we do that. So the agenda for today was hearing kind of some of the stuff that resonated with people. And then our goal was to do 2 rounds of breakout conversations so more people have a chance to talk with each other. And our original goal was to try to do that geographically. Mortifyingly, the goal was to really try to decenter Minnesota, but Minnesota keeps showing up in high numbers, which go Minnesota. We're awesome. And also, I just had so many interactions at the Farmland Access Summit with people, for example, in Wisconsin, being like, there's so much going on in Minnesota. And I'm like, but wait, there's like 7 huge centers of amazing activity going in Wisconsin. Don't you talk to each other? And so we may not have enough people from Wisconsin to talk to each other today, but we definitely, what might make sense is to have a little bit more open conversation here about some of the themes that people picked up on that they would like to carry forward. And a piece of our goal with trying to do that geographically was to be able to get into the space, like not just those who are represented, but like who are some of the actors in the ecosystem around equitable farmland access. So if they're not showing up, are there ways that we can connect with them? Are there other places we can show up? And then we were thinking of coming back and sharing a bit from that breakout conversation, and then a final breakout conversation in which we've actually kind of come up with, here are some of the project ideas that people have floated. Can we start to kind of build up a little bit of this? And I'll say a little bit more because I realize there are a few people who are joining us for the first time, and I would invite anybody else from the kind of steering committee or who's been attending just to give like any themes. So my impression so far, we've been meeting since July, roughly monthly, and we've been kind of addressing what are the issues of equitable farmland tenure, and particularly with attention to Black, Indigenous, and people of color, as Naima said, like navigating programs that really often were designed for commodity farmers. They haven't necessarily been designed, especially for people farming in groups, and with attention to racial equity, and especially given like we've covered some of the history of racial equity issues that face farmland tenure and why it's such a area of disequity and racial differentiation. And then we've really kind of focused in on some of the areas that people have been interested in, and people have been starting to say, you know, we could make some difference in this particular area. And so some of the projects have been really focused on like a piece of land that could be managed differently or could transition to a different kind of group management. And some of the projects have been much more like we could help FSA build like a better guide to some of their programs that might be relevant for urban farmers, just as like two totally different kinds of projects proposed. Does anyone else want to give a kind of like where we've been or where you'd love to see us going?
I didn't say I wasn't at the summit and at the Emerging Farmers Conference. And in both, yeah, there's a sense that, you know, things have changed in the last maybe, I don't know, 10 years. There's been a lot of, you know, excitement and people interested in farming, and even, you know, even the USDA, the MDA, trying their best to like be there for the emerging farmers who are interested in farming. So I feel like while we think or we see the disconnect, I think it's really just finding the right way to connect the two. I think we can do that as a team here. One thing that I know is happening is there are different groups or organizations trying to like come up with you know, folks who can become land access, you know, help in that. But I feel like at the end, we all need to like just find a way to coordinate and know what each and everyone is doing and how we feel those spaces that are not filled. So we don't just end up all in one corner or the other, but we are spread and covering this. So I'm excited. That's what I'm looking for, is to find how, you know, how we can get, you know, more farmers on the land. One particular thing that I would bring up that I've recently been talking about is how to do focus groups that really talk about, like for the farmers I work with, mostly I'd like to see a focus group that is always trying to review and analyze or understand all these programs. And it could be just, you know, doing you know, just grabbing one program at a time and looking at what those templates are and trying to like figure out if the farmers, given that template, do they understand what it is? Different farmers will understand different things, right? Even though it's, so there will be that simple language and continuing to simplify that so that, you know, at the end, that's how we'll bring, you know, the farmer and the service provider or the institutions together. So yeah, so I am here. I'll just be all over trying to say everything.
I love it. I love it.
And
Thank you,
anything.
Moses.
Yeah, I'll just echo some of what Moses said. It's not only like what I noticed about the Farmland Summit that I thought was really beautiful, and I think we talked a little bit, Valentine, about it, of just how these kind of like more fringy, I hesitate to use the word radical, kind of approaches to land access are now becoming a lot more commonplace. I don't want to say center stage, but it was really fascinating and warming to see the needle kind of moving on this approach and backing away from this like kind of more one-to-one based land transfers that's a lot of times just based on personality, but kind of a lot more emphasis put on like collectivization or like group purchasing of properties and kind of like the power behind that. So that would be a project that I would be interested in talking more about too. But yeah, there's also there was something with an LSP steering committee that was also last week, but talking through the equity in state programs and things like that Moses touched on, and this kind of this cycle in grants where it's like, well, we put aside a bunch of money for BIPOC farmers and they didn't use any of it, and not looking at that situation as like it's not because it's not needed. So how to shift that narrative, I think, on like the nonprofit and government level would be a project too. Outreach.
Jen, can you just repeat the part from the previous project, like of what you thought the project was there?
The LSP like land steering committee, we were talking about how like a lot of things at the nonprofit and government level that are like set aside for underserved and BIPOC farmers not being utilized, and the organizations kind of coming back and being like, well, I guess like the kind of if you don't use it, you lose it idea, instead of refocusing those efforts on outreach.
Right. So it's partly the project is like reframing more effective outreach.
Yeah, definitely.
Thank you. I mean, I just want to kind of comment on, Grace, what you just wrote in the chat, and maybe you'd like to share this now too. I appreciate what people are doing, is thinking like, here's something I learned and here's how it might nudge us toward action. Or here are some of the actions I'm involved in if these line up with what other people are interested in.
Thanks. Yeah, I was like, I don't think this is the right time, but I was just like, if anyone wants to hear about it, because it's like it's really specific. So I don't know if that's what we want.
I think specific often is where we get to when it's time to act. So I think that's totally
sure. I'll try to be brief, and so and I can share the full document about what Minneapolis is up to. And but thank you for putting the notes. But yeah, as I said in my intro, Minneapolis is just finished the Minneapolis Food Action Plan, which is our implementation plan of the food vision. And one of the big topics for that is urban agriculture land access. And so we worked with the Food Council to come up with several actions that are relevant to that. And so I thought maybe it'd be useful, and I think would tie really well into what everyone else is doing. And obviously there's some things that, like, because we're Minneapolis, are, not like necessarily scalable, but some things that might be more scalable to folks. Our third action is hoping to inventory both existing and potential agricultural space in Minneapolis, both city-owned, park board-owned, county-owned, state-owned, if we can possibly find a way, privately owned land, to figure out where are people growing, how can we support them, and where might people be able to grow, and how can we help them get access to that, creating some sort of map. So that's one project that we are in super early stages of. We just finished this implementation plan in November. So, but that's something that is upcoming, and we'll definitely need partners on to work on. And then relatedly, another action is and it's kind of funny because now there's the Renewing the Countryside USDA Urban Ag Steering Committee, right, which I'm part of, that is sort of doing some of this stuff. But the idea from the Food Council was to create a sort of resource hub to connect people, to kind of be a one-stop shop for, I want to grow food in Minneapolis. How do I do that? So technical assistance for accessing land, information about water access, where to get seed, a bunch of stuff. This idea is super not fully formed yet, but we're looking into some existing models from other places, and would love collaboration on that as we get going into it, on what that can look like. And is it working just with, kind of what other folks are doing? Is it something that's our own thing? We don't really want it to be just our own thing, but something that makes it easier for folks who are interested in doing it. I think that's the main two things that are super. Well, no, that's not. The other thing that would be relevant to other folks is eventually just figuring out how we can work with our partners at Hennepin County, hey Kevin, and maybe also MnDOT and some other folks on supporting other agencies to better use their land for urban ag. So that's, very relevant to obviously what we're talking about here. And internally, we're working on trying to preserve some of the gardens that are on city-owned land that don't have secure land access. So that's a separate topic I can get into if we want, but that's much more detailed and bureaucratic and relevant for like this specific lots that we're dealing with. But long-term, definitely interested in some more solutions, right? We're trying to do some quick like Band-Aid fixes for some stuff urgently, and then coming up with a longer-term way of transferring land that's used for growing out of city-owned hands so that it doesn't get developed. So that's what we're up to. Hopefully that was brief.
So I would love to ask a somewhat teacherly process question for folks, because it seems like it might be a good time not to jump directly into projects, but to go into slightly smaller groups to be discussing like what we're discussing in the big group right now, but this kind of idea of like things that you've been learning, actionable steps that stand out to you that you'd like to pursue, and also things that you feel confused about or that need clarification. Because I know many of you mentioned, having just learned a bunch of new stuff and there's like a sea of it. Would folks like to try to be in geographic sections, or do you just want to be in like random groups for this? And then we'll let everybody choose their own breakout rooms when we go back into breakout for kind of figuring out what are the actionable projects we want to start building. Do people have a strong feeling about geographic affinity?
Is there anyone on the call that's not Minnesota based?
Yeah, there's a couple: Wisconsin, Iowa, Missouri.
Okay. I mean, I wouldn't mind a regional discussion just because sometimes it gets sad looking at Minnesota and everything you all have going on already for states that are trying to kind of catch up and use Minnesota as a model for a lot of this work.
And it does strike me, I mean, that question that just came up of like how we get access to public land, that's going to make sense. Obviously the mechanics are going to make sense locally, but once there are some mechanics that are demonstrated to work well, it seems like teaming up across states is going to make that much more effective. And similarly, I thought about that, Grace, when you were talking about a resource hub. Like, it would be lovely to hear what resource hubs have made possible places and what persistent challenges are not helped by resource hubs. So I feel like that's kind of one of the goals of having a community of practice like this. To just jump into some breakout rooms to continue the conversation we're having now, but where everybody can be heard for what feels good, like about 10 minutes. I want to make sure we can actually get back into conversations and have time for projects. And what we're going to do is put in, you can see that Noah put in the chat Google Doc so that your breakout room can keep notes if you, I'll stick that back in the chat. So if you want to open up that Google Doc, for those of you for whom that's easy, that makes it likely that someone in your breakout room will have access to it. And then we can kind of collectively make sure we're keeping track of some of these project ideas. I really appreciate so far the two I just mentioned, but then also this idea of shifting the frame of outreach. There's been a lot of very interesting work going on with government programs and with philanthropy, changing the like, we're going to make you jump through a bunch of hoops to, we want to know who you are. We see how you've done good work. How do we resource you? So like shifting that, like we're trying to make sure that the resources get to the people doing the good work as a really different paradigm for funding. And like, where are places that are plausible that we could help move that along toward equitable farmland access? That feels like it could be very actionable and very timely. And that idea that Moses was bringing up of networking our efforts more effectively, like where can we plug into that? I feel like there's so much work that's adjacent to what we're doing that doesn't zoom right in on like the equitable and group farming focus. And, you know, our goal was to meet for a year. So at the end of this year, where can we have moved the dial so that there's some momentum from what we did? Okay, and I will pop those prompts back into that Google Doc so you have access to them. And also feel free to go off prompt, but if you feel like you'd like some structure to your conversation.
If it sounds good to you, Valentine, I can create, I have a breakout room, 2 breakout rooms for Minnesota, and then a 3rd breakout room for the states that aren't Minnesota, for people to discuss. Does that sound good to everyone? Okay, cool. Just let me know when we're ready. And
I think this is a good moment. Come back, everybody. So our goal for this transitional moment is to kind of figure out some of the key themes that you've been talking about, we've been talking about, and how those could translate into projects. So maybe we'll just open it up for the 3 groups to say some of the projects that, and I think that maybe it's worth saying, like, here's a project, and maybe starting to say, like, are these projects that our group could take on, or is this a project we really need to farm out to say like a state agency or something? But what parts of it could we work on, I guess, is the question. Let's start with the not Minnesota group.
So even though I'm not from, well, I am from not Minnesota, but I'm not from any of the states in question, I volunteered to speak. Basically, there was one very clear issue that emerged, at least after I joined the group. A lot of the collective landholding models are based around 99-year long-term leases. And the state laws we discussed, I believe, Wisconsin and Iowa. In Wisconsin, the maximum lease is 15 years. And in Iowa, the maximum lease is 20 years. And so that is a pretty major roadblock when it comes to people trying to create sort of commons organizations, or like CLT, I'm assuming, organizations, and also for conservation or trusts who would be interested in leasing out land to farmers. And so the opportunity for a project would probably be something, from what I gathered, policy or politically oriented. And I believe Shelley mentioned that there is already a Wisconsin policy working group that's sort of in the early stages of doing stuff related to this. But yeah, that's the potential project.
Both Shelley and Stefan were about to say something probably really cool. Do you guys remember what you were about to say?
Well, I just wanted everyone to know that we were admiring the Namibian flag that was in Shelley's background, and about to launch into a discussion of German imperialism in Southwest Africa, but got cut off. No, actually, I think we one thing we said was, well, let's check on these statutes and see what they really do. And if you guys have seen a citation, Shelley, Jean, to these statutes, and you would send it to me in an email, I'll put my email in the chat. That would make it easier for me to look it up. And it took me, I mean, there's one in Minnesota too, and I was like baffled trying to find it, because it's, you know, it's there, it's law, but like nobody really talks about it. So I'll put my email in the chat. If you could just send that, if you see any reference to it or what it's called or anything, that would be helpful.
And one of the seeds I'd love to plant along with that is, like, it's exciting to know that there's that policy working group in Wisconsin, but like if there are people who have been working on this, because in Minnesota it's in the state constitution. And so I know, for example, I think I learned this from Andrea actually, that people have been using, like, agricultural easements are not leases. Like, there are ways that that's one of the reasons easements have become so popular compared to some of these other ground lease kinds of methods because they are not bound by that. But like knowing who works on those things could help us build out that ecosystem. Yeah, so it seems similar, Shelley, that it's in the Constitution. There was clearly an obsession at the time these constitutions were written against reproducing Scandinavian style feudalism. Like that appears to be what people were guarding against. How about the first Minnesota group? What did you, projects that you discussed?
Folks have any, I don't think we got to any super specific projects, but we were talking a lot about the different ways that ag can look and the challenges that that poses when working with existing systems. So like folks who aren't necessarily doing it for a business, or folks who are, but they're doing it for value added products purposes. And then that same concept of collective growing and how to do that. And then the difference is also between how there's some struggles that are very specific to where you are, like zoning and that kind of thing, versus some things that are not as specific and that seems like everybody faces. So that's a super short version, and I'm sure someone can tell me if I missed something.
I think you covered it well, Grace.
And you all have maybe had to hear me talk about this before, but that feels really important, thinking about trying to update what ag looks like not just commodity agriculture. Because I know in that policy review work that Stephen mentioned that we've been doing together with TCALT, part of what Stephen dug up is that one of the places that this becomes a really concrete roadblock for people, at least in Minnesota, and I would be shocked if this were not true in the adjacent states, is that there are tax modules for training tax assessors about what agriculture is supposed to look like. And so one of the places that people get turned away is when they try to get agricultural classification and they're not a commodity farm. And people are like, you're clearly not farming. And so thinking like that feels like a very actionable module. Like, can we get a one-pager of like, this is a range of what might need to be added to your training for tax assessors? And that could have a really, really high impact. And it's interesting, I think that because it's not ag, like it's not in the Department of Agriculture in any of the states, it falls out of the process. I went to a lot of the legal Q&A sessions, and this is actually a great segue back into what our group discussed too. The legal Q&A sessions at the Farmland Access Summit were so much about building relationship between mostly around farmland leases and around farmland transfer. But one of the questions I kept asking is, where in the process of accessing or setting up a tenure process do people get training in how to access the tax programs or the various infrastructure? And people were like, what do you mean? I'm like, well, how do people find out about this? Or how, like, who is the coach that helps people navigate this? And no one knew. So there's some literacy questions, and our group largely talked about the literacy questions around relationship building and the kind of process building, because people end up doing farmland transitions so rarely in their lives, especially long-term farmers, that they learn it and then they don't necessarily pass it on. So figuring out, could we create some literacy building? And we were talking both about farmland transfer, but also about conservation easements. We were reflecting a bit on the session that was about the negative experiences, particularly of BIPOC farmers, where well-meaning people have put conservation easements, but that have then limited what they've been able to do, or have created situations that felt like tenancy and not really having autonomy or the capacity to do innovative and stewardship-oriented stuff with farms. So what I think might be a good process for the rest of our time together is, if folks have comments or questions on any of these ideas, let's feel free to ask them. And then what maybe people could do is just stick in the chat which of these projects you'd be most excited to talk about. And we will build, Noah has volunteered to rename the breakout rooms according to what people are excited about. And then we can join. And I think there'll be a little bit of trial and error, because we don't totally know that there are multiple people in all the projects. But what we would recommend is probably going into the project room that you're most excited about, giving people a minute or two to show up. And if no one else is in that project room, going maybe to the project you're second most excited about. I can see everyone got cut off in mid-sentence. Were there key needs that folks are bringing back? So for example, in our group, we realized there are some recordings from recent events and like resources that have come out of other meetings and things we've heard people talk about that we want to get all in one place and have for our next meeting. And we came up with maybe 5 or 6 organizations that might be really useful ones to think about retraining people around reciprocity instead of kind of like reframing a perhaps defunct model of fairness in the way that resourcing for land transfer tends to go. Could some of the other groups tell us about how your projects are shaping up?
I think Gary would probably be the best suited to talk about our group, or if you'd like to.
You caught me off guard. Wow. We talked about a little bit of everything.
I threw you under the bus there, sorry. But here, I'll take it back.
I would not have known that it was you until you piped up just then, because I didn't see it highlight when somebody threw me under the bus. So, but no, we had a great conversation. And talking about reimagining kind of urban ag and what that reimagining looks like, because there's so many other things that kind of hinders what it really is from being in existence, like zoning policies and taxes and different things like that can really help it thrive. You know, the recognition of like plot sizes, smaller plots versus like the minimum, like 10 acre, I believe is what was mentioned. You know, I threw out the idea of looking at the Twin Cities Metro as one large urban farm of scattered plots. How do we aggregate those up under one system so that we can have leverage and say in challenging those systems? So we're just not congruent plots, we're, you know, scattered plots, and probably have more labor and resources going into it, just and intention from the community level. So yeah, there's talks about farming in groups. I'm looking at the notes here. So and then talking about how the zoning around ag can challenge like what taxes are paid. So how do you get this smaller ag recognized? Are there zoning or recognitions to help aid with that tax relief? You know, is that an exception to the point that, okay, it's residential urban ag or urban ag, and then as you get a different tax bracket or tax based on agriculture or something? So there's just different things that we were discussing, and the land, there's so much. I'm gonna leave it at that and somebody else can chime in. Jen.
Oh, thank you for the return of the bus. I just had to pipe in about like perennial land access, mostly with like FSA offices, and how it's really in my personal experience and in other folks I've talked to, it's a hard conversation to try to get an FSA officer to understand you're not going to make money for 10 years. But that's bigger. And I think we're out of time, but if anyone else wants to talk to.
All right, so we just talked about whether these things are real and agreed that it makes sense to try to pull together some information about what they actually say, what it would take to change them, what they are around the country. And just quickly, we can confirm that state constitution of Minnesota, 21-year maximum farm lease. Wisconsin state constitution, 15 years. They get the award so far for most insane limit. Iowa state constitution 20 years. And, you know, it's hard to change the state constitution. So this is something we really gotta think hard about, the best strategy. I hope that summarizes.
Thank you, everybody. I realize many folks have to jump off, and I appreciate everyone who came on the Wednesday before the holiday, but getting a lot of real affirmation and enthusiasm about the projects in the chat messages as people leave. So we will see you again on December 13th. And for those who want to be involved in these projects, but for that timing doesn't work out, we can totally set up, you know, off schedule meetings for the project teams and figure out how to facilitate those to meet everybody's needs. Thanks, everyone.